When my cousin Jessica demanded I pay for her $47,000 wedding in front of 23 family members at my grandmother's house, screaming that I was selfish and ungrateful for refusing to share my wealth, she had absolutely no idea what she was actually asking for. She thought I had just inherited some money and was being stingy. In reality, I was the sole heir to an $18.5 million fortune that came with conditions she couldn't begin to imagine. What happened next would expose a family-wide conspiracy to manipulate me, reveal fraud that had been happening for 8 years, and completely transform who had access to the family money forever. Comment where you're watching from right now and drop a like if you've ever dealt with entitled family members. Let me take you back and show you exactly how this all started. My name is Nathan Pierce, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I thought I was the disappointing middle child in a family of overachievers. My older sister Caroline was a corporate lawyer making $340,000 a year at a Manhattan firm. My younger brother Marcus was a successful tech entrepreneur who had sold his first startup for $2.3 million when he was just 24. And me? I was a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon, making $52,000 a year and living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that cost me $400 a month. I loved my job. I really did. There was something incredibly fulfilling about watching a student's eyes light up when they finally understood the significance of the Constitutional Convention or the complexities of the Civil Rights Movement. I'd been teaching for 6 years at Roosevelt High School, and I had built genuine relationships with my students and their families. My classroom was my sanctuary, decorated with historical posters, vintage maps, and a collection of 137 books I'd accumulated over the years. I wasn't wealthy, but I was content. My family didn't see it that way. At every family gathering there were comments, not always direct but pointed enough to sting. My Uncle Richard would ask loudly at Thanksgiving dinner how my salary compared to Caroline's bonus that year. My Aunt Patricia would mention how Marcus just bought his 3rd investment property, while sipping wine and looking at me meaningfully. My cousin Jessica would post photos of her luxury vacations on social media and tag me with comments like, "Wish you could afford to join us next time." The truth was, I had gotten used to being the family disappointment. I had made peace with it, or so I thought. Everything changed on October 14th, 2023. It was a Tuesday, and I was in the middle of teaching my 3rd period American history class about the Progressive Era when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the 4th buzz, I knew something was wrong. During my lunch break, I finally checked my phone. There were 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, along with a voicemail marked urgent. My hands were shaking slightly as I listened to the message. "Mr. Pierce, this is Donald Whitmore from Whitmore & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Harold Benjamin Ashford. It's imperative that you contact our office immediately. This concerns a substantial inheritance and there are time-sensitive matters we need to discuss. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Harold Benjamin Ashford, my great-uncle Ben." I sat there in the teacher's lounge, staring at my half-eaten sandwich, trying to process what I'd just heard. Uncle Ben had passed away 6 weeks earlier at the age of 91. I had attended his funeral, a small, quiet affair with maybe 40 people. He had always been the eccentric member of the family, the one who never married, who lived alone in a modest house in Seattle, who collected stamps and wrote letters by hand. I remembered him as kind, but distant, someone who sent me $50 checks for my birthday when I was a kid and asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career at family events. I had no idea he had money. None of us did. I called the number back during my planning period. A receptionist with a crisp, professional voice transferred me immediately to Mr. Whitmore. "Mr. Pierce, thank you for calling back," he said. His voice was warm but carried the weight of someone delivering serious news. "I'm the executor of your great-uncle Harold's estate. Are you somewhere private where we can talk?" I stepped out into the hallway, away from the noise of the cafeteria. "Yes, I can talk. Your great-uncle has named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate, Mr. Whitmore said. There was a pause, like he was giving me time to absorb this. "The estate is valued at approximately $18.5 million. The hallway seemed to tilt. I actually reached out and put my hand against the wall to steady myself. "I'm sorry. Did you say $18.5 million? "Yes, sir. The bulk of it comes from investments your great-uncle made over 40 years in various technology companies, real estate holdings, and a carefully managed stock portfolio. He lived very modestly, as you may know, but he was an exceptionally shrewd investor, He also owned 14 rental properties throughout Washington state that generate approximately $43,000 in monthly income. I couldn't breathe properly. Students were passing by in the hallway, laughing and talking, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. Why me? I managed to ask. I mean, I barely knew him. We only saw each other a few times a year. Your great-uncle left a letter explaining his decision, Mr. Whitmore said. But the short answer is that he believed you were the only member of the family who wouldn't squander it. He was very specific in his instructions, Mr. Pierce. Very specific. The inheritance comes with conditions. Something was wrong. I could hear it in his voice, the way he emphasized that last word. What kind of conditions? I'd prefer to discuss this in person, he said. How soon can you come to Seattle? There's also the matter of several documents that require your immediate signature, and I think you'll want to understand the full scope of your great-uncle's wishes before we proceed. We scheduled a meeting for that Saturday, 3 days away. I hung up and stood in the empty hallway for a long time, just trying to make sense of what had happened. $18.5 million. The number felt fake, like something from a movie. I made $52,000 a year. This was enough money to never work again if I didn't want to. This was generational wealth. This was life-changing. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Some instinct told me to keep it quiet until I understood what I was dealing with. That Saturday, I drove the 3 hours from Portland to Seattle and met Mr. Whitmore at his office in a sleek downtown building. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair, and the kind of expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted wealth. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Thank you for coming, Mr. Pierce, he said, shaking my hand firmly. Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I shook my head. I was too nervous to drink anything. He sat across from me and opened a thick folder. Let me start by saying that your great-uncle was one of the most thoughtful clients I've ever worked with. He spent years planning this, revising it, making sure every detail was exactly as he wanted. He cared deeply about his legacy and about you specifically. He pulled out a handwritten letter and handed it to me. He wrote this for you. I think you should read it before we discuss the terms. The letter was written in Uncle Ben's distinctive, spidery handwriting, the same handwriting I remembered from those birthday checks. My hands trembled as I read it. Dear Nathan, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and Donald is doing his job properly. First, I want you to know that this decision isn't random. I've watched you for years, Nathan. I've seen how you chose a career that pays modestly because you believe in education. I've seen how you treat people with kindness, even when your family makes subtle jabs about your choices. I've watched you remain humble and grounded while your siblings chased prestige and wealth. That's rare. That's valuable. That's why you're reading this letter and they're not. I made my money quietly, through patience and careful decisions over 40 years. I lived below my means because I didn't need much to be happy. My stamp collection and my books were enough for me. But I always knew this money should go to someone who would use it wisely, not wastefully. Someone who understands that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. The money is yours, Nathan, but it comes with conditions. I know that might frustrate you, but these conditions exist to protect you and to ensure my legacy continues the way I intended. Trust Donald. He'll explain everything. And Nathan, don't let them change you. The people who didn't value you when you were a teacher making $52,000 a year don't suddenly deserve your generosity now that you have money. Be smart, be kind, but be firm. You'll understand what I mean soon enough. With deep affection, Uncle Ben. I had to read it twice because my eyes were blurring with tears. He had been watching me. All those years when I thought I was invisible, disappointing, not enough for my family, he had been watching and he had seen value in exactly who I was. The conditions, Mr. Whitmore said gently, pulling out another document, are quite specific. First, you cannot tell anyone about the full extent of the inheritance for a minimum of 90 days. This is to protect you from immediate pressure and manipulation. I nodded slowly. That made sense, actually. Second, during those 90 days, you must continue your normal life as much as possible. Keep teaching. Maintain your routines. Your great-uncle believed this period would reveal people's true intentions. Reveal how? I asked. You're permitted to mention that you received some money from the estate, but you cannot specify amounts. Your great-uncle predicted that even a small inheritance would bring out interesting behavior in certain family members. He wasn't wrong. I thought about Jessica's wedding demands, my uncle's comments, all the little ways my family had made me feel less than. Third, and this is crucial, Mr. Whitmore continued, the inheritance includes a provision for what your great-uncle called the generosity test. If any family member demands or expects financial assistance from you during the 90-day period without knowing the full extent of your inheritance, they are automatically disqualified from ever receiving any portion of it. Your great-uncle set aside $2.7 million specifically to help family members who treat you with genuine kindness and respect, not because they know about the money, but because that's who they are. This was getting complicated. So if someone demands I pay for something, they disqualify themselves permanently, Mr. Whitmore confirmed. Your great-uncle was very clear about this. He watched his own siblings and their children treat wealth as an expectation rather than a blessing. He didn't want that attitude anywhere near his legacy. What happens to the money that would have gone to them? It goes to educational charities that you select. Your great-uncle was passionate about education. He established 17 scholarships over his lifetime, all anonymously. I sat back in my chair overwhelmed. Uncle Ben had essentially set up an elaborate test, a way to see who in my family valued me as a person versus who valued me as a potential ATM machine. There's one more thing, Mr. Whitmore said. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. Your great-uncle kept detailed notes about family dynamics over the past 15 years. He documented patterns of behavior, specific incidents, conversations. He wanted you to have the full picture. I opened the journal and started reading. Page after page of observations written in Uncle Ben's careful handwriting. He had documented every cutting remark, every subtle put-down, every time someone in the family had made me feel small, but he had also documented the few times people had been genuinely kind. My cousin Daniel asking about my students without any agenda. My Aunt Margaret bringing me homemade soup when I had the flu. Small gestures that meant something. It was like seeing my entire family through new eyes. He had been watching everyone, not just me. When does the 90-day period start? I asked. The day you sign the acceptance documents, Mr. Whitmore said, which can be today if you're ready. I thought about it for exactly 12 seconds. I'm ready. I signed 17 different documents over the next hour. By the time I left Mr. Whitmore's office, I was legally the owner of $18, $5 million, 14 rental properties, and a responsibility I still didn't fully comprehend. I drove back to Portland in a daze. The rain was coming down hard, typical Pacific Northwest weather, and I had plenty of time to think. Uncle Ben had given me an incredible gift, but he had also given me a burden. For the next 90 days, I would be watching my family interact with me, knowing that every conversation, every request, every comment would be a test of their character. I decided to tell my family that I had inherited some money that Monday evening. I called my parents first. That's wonderful, Nathan, my mother said warmly. Uncle Ben was always fond of you. How much did he leave you? I'm not really supposed to discuss specifics, I said, keeping my voice casual. But it's enough to make a difference. Well, that's nice, dear, she said. There was a pause. You know, your father and I have been thinking about finally renovating the kitchen. The cabinets are 30 years old. If you wanted to help with that, we'd certainly appreciate it. My heart sank a little. I'll think about it, Mom. Of course, she said quickly. No pressure. We're just happy for you. But there was pressure. I could hear it in her voice. The subtle expectation that now that I had money, I should share it. This was going to be one of those nights. I called Caroline next. She answered on the first ring, her voice brisk and professional even though it was 8 p.m. on a Monday. Nathan, hi. Mom just texted me. She said Uncle Ben left you some money? Yeah, some. I can't really talk about the details. Okay, but we're talking what? 5 figures? 6 figures? Caroline, I really can't. Because if it's significant, you should talk to my financial advisor. I can set up a meeting. You're not exactly experienced with managing investments. The dig was subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't experienced because I'd never had money to invest, and she knew it. I have a lawyer handling things, I said, keeping my voice level. But thanks. A lawyer? She sounded surprised. For what? A small inheritance? Nathan, you might be overpaying for services you don't need. How much did Uncle Ben actually leave you? Enough to need a lawyer, I said. Listen, I have to go. I have papers to grade. Fine, but think about what I said. You don't want to waste money on unnecessary professional fees. I hung up and sat on my couch staring at my modest apartment. The furniture was mismatched, bought from thrift stores and IKEA over the years. My TV was 7 years old. I didn't own a car worth more than $8,000. This was my life, and up until 3 days ago, I had been perfectly content with it. Now everything felt different. My mother wanted a kitchen renovation. Caroline thought I was too stupid to manage money on my own. I hadn't even told Marcus yet, and I already felt the weight of expectations pressing down on me. The next day at school, I tried to focus on teaching, but my mind kept drifting to Uncle Ben's letter. Don't let them change you. The people who didn't value you when you were a teacher making $52,000 a year don't suddenly deserve your generosity now that you have money. He had known exactly what would happen. That evening, Marcus called me. Dude, Mom told me about Uncle Ben. That's awesome. How much are we talking? I can't really say, I told him. Come on, man, I'm your brother, you can tell me. The lawyer said I'm not supposed to discuss amounts. There was a pause. Okay, but enough to pay off your student loans? Because if you need help figuring out the smartest way to use a windfall, I've been through this before. When I sold my startup, I had to make a lot of strategic decisions. I appreciate that, Marcus, but I'm good. You sure? Because if you have $50,000 or $100,000, there are some really smart investment opportunities I could connect you with. I know people. 50 or 100,000. He was so far from the real number that it would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. He was already positioning himself as the expert, ready to swoop in and help me manage what he assumed was a modest sum. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls and messages kept coming. Aunt Patricia needed help with her property taxes. Cousin Brandon was looking for investors in his new business venture and thought I might want to get in on the ground floor. Cousin Jessica texted me 14 times about her upcoming wedding, each message more pointed than the last about how expensive weddings were and how families should support each other. I kept my responses polite but vague. I watched as Uncle Ben had predicted, as the family dynamic slowly revealed itself. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked if the inheritance came with any challenges or responsibilities. It was all about what I could do for them now that I had some money. The journal Uncle Ben left me became my evening reading. He had documented 15 years of family gatherings, and the patterns were undeniable. Caroline dismissing my career choice 23 separate times in various ways. Marcus positioning himself as superior in 31 documented instances. Jessica making 19 comments over the years about my apartment, my car, my salary, always with that particular edge that made it clear she thought I was less than. But there were also notes about people who had been kind. Cousin Daniel visiting me in the hospital when I had appendicitis, bringing magazines and staying for 3 hours. Aunt Margaret defending my career choice when Uncle Richard made a particularly cutting remark at Thanksgiving 4 years ago. These moments stood out because they were genuine, with no expectation of return. Then came the moment that would change everything. It was the 4th week after I'd signed the inheritance documents. My grandmother was celebrating her 85th birthday, and the whole family was gathering at her house in Seattle for a big party. There would be 47 people there, all the aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, the whole extended Pierce family. I dreaded it, but I also knew this was exactly the kind of event Uncle Ben had anticipated. I could almost hear his voice from the letter. The people who didn't value you when you were a teacher making $52,000 a year don't suddenly deserve your generosity now that you have money. Be smart, be kind, but be firm. I drove to Seattle on Saturday morning, April 6th, arriving at my grandmother's house around noon. The place was already crowded, filled with the familiar sounds of my family, laughter and conversation and the clinking of glasses. I hugged my grandmother and gave her the gift I'd brought, a vintage photograph of her childhood home that I'd had professionally restored. "Oh, Nathan, this is beautiful," she said, her eyes getting misty. "Thank you, sweetheart." "Of course, Grandma. Happy birthday." I made my way through the crowd, greeting relatives, accepting congratulations about Uncle Ben's inheritance. Everyone wanted to know how much, but I kept deflecting. The tension was building. I could feel it. Around 2 p.m., Jessica cornered me in the kitchen. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her engagement ring catching the light in a way that seemed almost aggressive. "Nathan, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Okay," I said carefully. "It's about my wedding. It's in 8 weeks and we're having some budgetary issues. The venue costs went up by $12,000, and the florist is demanding payment up front, which is another $8,000. And honestly, with what you inherited from Uncle Ben, I was hoping you might want to contribute." "Jessica, I really can't." "You can't?" Her voice rose sharply, loud enough that people in the adjacent living room could hear. "Nathan, I'm your cousin. We're family. You just inherited money and I'm asking for help with my wedding. This is important to me. I understand that, but what? She was practically shouting now. People were definitely listening. You're being selfish. You've always been the poor one in the family, and now that you actually have some money, you're acting like you're too good to help out. That's pathetic, Nathan. That's really pathetic. The kitchen had gone quiet. My Uncle Richard had appeared in the doorway, along with my Aunt Patricia and several cousins. They were all watching. Jessica, I don't think this is the right time or place, I said quietly. No, this is exactly the right time, she snapped, because everyone needs to hear this. Nathan inherited money from Uncle Ben, probably a significant amount based on how secretive he's being about it, and he won't even help his own cousin with her wedding. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who doesn't owe you anything, I said, my voice still calm but with an edge now. My inheritance is my business, Jessica, not yours. We're family, she said, her face flushed red. That means something, or at least it should. But I guess you're too busy being a glorified babysitter at that public school to understand what family obligation means. There it was. The contempt that had always been there, just barely concealed behind fake smiles at family gatherings. She had never respected my career. She had never respected me. And now that she thought I had money, she felt entitled to it. I'm a teacher, Jessica, I said. I teach American history to 147 students who actually appreciate what I do, and I'm proud of that. You should be proud of helping family, she shot back. My wedding costs $47,000, Nathan. $47,000. You know what Uncle Ben probably left you? At least 6 figures at least. And you won't contribute even a small fraction to help me have the wedding I deserve. My Uncle Richard stepped forward. Nathan, son, is this true? You're refusing to help Jessica? I looked at him, remembering Uncle Ben's journal. 12 documented instances of Richard mocking my salary. 5 times he'd made pointed comments about Caroline's success versus my modest aspirations. 3 times he'd asked me if I regretted not going into law like my sister. I'm not discussing my finances at Grandma's birthday party, I said firmly. Because you're embarrassed, Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain. You got a little bit of money and now you think you're better than us. Well, newsflash, Nathan. You're still just a teacher making basically nothing. The inheritance doesn't change who you fundamentally are, which is someone who never lived up to your potential. The room was dead silent now. I could see my mother standing near the dining room, her face conflicted. Caroline was watching with her arms crossed, not saying anything but not defending me either. Marcus had his phone out, probably recording this for later entertainment. And then my grandmother's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Jessica Lynn Morrison, that is enough. Everyone turned. My grandmother was standing in the doorway, all 4'11" of her, and she looked furious. This is my birthday party, she said, her voice shaking with anger. And you are harassing your cousin over money that belongs to him, money that Ben specifically left to Nathan for reasons that are none of your business. But Grandma, Jessica started. I said enough, my grandmother snapped. I have watched this family treat Nathan like he's less than for years, and I'm sick of it. He's a wonderful teacher. He's kind. He's humble. And he doesn't owe you a single penny, Jessica. Not for your overpriced wedding, not for anything. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I just thought, family should help family. Family should respect family, my grandmother said firmly. Something you clearly haven't learned. Now apologize to Nathan and then leave my house. Leave? Jessica looked shocked. Grandma, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Apologize and leave. Jessica looked around the room, clearly expecting someone to come to her defense. Nobody did. Even her own parents, my Aunt Linda and Uncle Frank, were staring at the floor, embarrassed. Fine, Jessica said coldly. Nathan, I'm sorry that you're too selfish to help family. I hope that inheritance makes you very happy in your lonely little apartment. She grabbed her purse and stormed out. Her fiancé Brad followed her, looking mortified. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then my grandmother walked over to me and took my hand. Don't you let them make you feel guilty, she said quietly. Ben knew what he was doing when he chose you, don't forget that. I hugged her, my eyes stinging with tears. Thank you, Grandma. The party continued, but the mood had shifted. People kept their distance from me now, like I had suddenly become dangerous or unpredictable. I heard whispered conversations in corners, saw suspicious glances. Jessica had basically declared war on me in front of the entire family, and now everyone was choosing sides. What they didn't know was that Jessica had just disqualified herself from ever receiving a single penny of Uncle Ben's money. The generosity test had claimed its first casualty. Over the next 3 weeks, the situation escalated in ways I couldn't have imagined. Jessica posted a long rant on Facebook about how I had refused to help her with her wedding, making me sound like a terrible person. She conveniently left out the part where she had screamed at me and insulted my career. The post got 89 comments, mostly from people who didn't know me, calling me selfish and cold-hearted. Caroline called me and suggested I just give Jessica something to smooth things over and keep the peace. When I refused, she said, "You're being stubborn about this, Nathan. Is this really the hill you want to die on?" "It's not about being stubborn," I said. "It's about boundaries. Jessica doesn't respect me, and giving her money won't change that. Maybe not, but refusing is making you look bad to the whole family." "Let me look bad then," I said, and hung up. My mother called next, her voice pleading. "Nathan, sweetheart, I know Jessica was out of line, but she's young and stressed about the wedding. Can't you just contribute something small? $5,000? $10,000? It would mean so much to her." "Mom, she called me pathetic and worthless in front of 23 people, I said. "Why should I reward that behavior?" "Because we're family," she said softly, "and family forgives." "Forgiveness doesn't require funding her wedding," I replied. "She can apologize sincerely, without conditions, and we can rebuild from there. But I'm not giving her money." The calls kept coming. Uncle Richard suggested I was being financially irresponsible by not investing in family harmony. Aunt Patricia said I was letting money change me, which was ironic since she had been the first to ask for help with her property taxes. Even Marcus weighed in, saying I should give Jessica money for strategic family relationship management. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked if the inheritance had come with stress or responsibility. It was all about what I should do for everyone else. I kept teaching my classes, kept grading papers, kept living my normal life, but I was also documenting everything, just like Uncle Ben had done. Every demand, every guilt trip, every attempt to manipulate me into opening my wallet. I had started my own journal, following his example, and the patterns were impossible to ignore. Then, 7 weeks into the 90-day waiting period, something unexpected happened. My cousin Daniel called me. We hadn't been particularly close, but he had always been kind to me, one of the few who never made me feel less than. "Hey Nathan," he said, "I heard about what happened at Grandma's party. That sounded really rough." "It was," I admitted. "Listen, I just wanted to say I think Jessica was completely out of line. What you do with your inheritance is your business. Nobody has a right to demand anything from you." I was so surprised I didn't know what to say at first. "Thank you, Daniel. That actually means a lot." "Of course, man, you're family. And I don't mean that in the you owe me money way. I mean it in the actual sense. You're a good guy, Nathan. You've always been a good guy. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." We talked for 20 more minutes, just catching up, talking about his job as a physical therapist and my students. He didn't ask for money. He didn't hint at needing help. He just called to be supportive, and it was the first genuine conversation I'd had with a family member since the inheritance. I made a note of it in my journal. Daniel had passed the test without even knowing there was a test. Then came week 8, and the situation reached a breaking point that would change everything. Jessica had been posting more and more aggressive content on social media, essentially running a campaign to paint me as the villain. She had started a hashtag, #CronosherFamilyFirst, and was encouraging people to share stories of family members who helped with weddings. The implication was clear. I was a bad family member because I refused to help. Some of my extended relatives had started commenting on her posts, agreeing with her. "Family should support family," my second cousin Amy wrote. "Money doesn't matter more than relationships," added my Uncle Tom. I didn't respond to any of it. I just documented it and waited. Then, on a Thursday evening, I got a call from Mr. Whitmore. "Nathan, we have a situation," he said, his voice serious. "I received a legal demand letter today from Jessica Morrison's attorney. She's threatening to sue you for what she calls her fair share of Harold Ashford's estate." My stomach dropped. "Can she do that?" "She can try," Mr. Whitmore said. "The suit has no merit. Your great-uncle's will is ironclad, and she has no legal claim to any portion of it. But it tells us something important about her character and her intentions. What happens now? Now we respond appropriately. But Nathan, I think it's time we had another conversation. The 90-day period ends in 13 days. We need to discuss what comes next, including how you want to handle the revelation of your full inheritance." We scheduled a meeting for Saturday. In the meantime, I received 11 more calls from family members all asking me to settle with Jessica, to give her something to make the lawsuit go away, to be the bigger person. I didn't respond to any of them. That Saturday, I drove back to Seattle and met with Mr. Whitmore in his office. He had several thick folders spread across his desk. "Let's talk about what we've learned during these 90 days, he said, pulling out a document. "According to the terms of your great-uncle's will, anyone who demanded money from you without knowing the full extent of your inheritance is disqualified from the $2.7 million family fund. Let's go through the list." He pulled out a spreadsheet. It was remarkably detailed. Jessica Morrison, disqualified. Made demands totaling $47,000 and threatened legal action. Your mother, Ellen Pierce, disqualified. Made requests for kitchen renovation totaling $35,000. Your sister, Caroline Pierce, technically didn't ask directly, but made multiple comments implying you should invest in her recommended fund, from which she would receive referral fees. Your great-uncle anticipated this kind of indirect manipulation. Disqualified. Your brother, Marcus Pierce, made multiple suggestions about investment opportunities that would benefit him. Disqualified. The list went on. Uncle Richard, Aunt Patricia, Aunt Linda, Uncle Frank, 6 different cousins. 23 family members in total had made requests or demands during the 90-day period. 23 people had failed the test. However, Mr. Whitmore continued, there are notable exceptions. Your grandmother, Ruth Pierce, not only didn't ask for anything but actively defended you. Your cousin, Daniel Morrison, called to offer support without any request for money. Your Aunt Margaret sent you a card saying she was proud of you and hoped the inheritance brought you peace with no mention of wanting anything. 4 people. Out of my entire extended family, only 4 had passed the test. What happens to the $2.7 million that was set aside for family? I asked. According to the will, it's now divided among the family members who demonstrated genuine care. Your grandmother receives $900,000. Daniel receives $900,000. Aunt Margaret receives $900,000. That's $2.7 million distributed to people who valued you as a person, not as a bank account. I sat back, overwhelmed. Uncle Ben had predicted all of this with stunning accuracy. He had known exactly how people would behave. There's one more thing, Mr. Whitmore said, pulling out another document. Your great-uncle also left instructions for what he called the revelation. This is how he suggested you reveal the full extent of your inheritance to your family. It's detailed, it's dramatic, and frankly, it's brilliant. Would you like to hear it? I nodded. Mr. Whitmore opened the document and started reading. As he explained Uncle Ben's plan, I felt my jaw drop. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. When would this happen? I asked. Your great-uncle suggested the day after the 90-day period ends. He even set aside funds to rent a specific venue and hire a professional to document everything. He wanted this on record, Nathan. He wanted your family to understand exactly what they had done. Let's do it, I said. My voice was steady, certain. Let's do exactly what he planned. Over the next 2 weeks, Mr. Whitmore and I prepared for what Uncle Ben had called the Revelation event. We sent formal invitations to every member of the Pierce family, 47 people in total, for a mandatory meeting regarding the estate of Harold Benjamin Ashford. The invitation was deliberately vague about the purpose, saying only that there were important matters to discuss regarding the distribution of assets and that attendance was required for anyone who wished to have any future involvement in estate matters. The meeting was scheduled for May 18th at a conference room in an upscale hotel in downtown Seattle. Uncle Ben had even prepaid for the venue rental, catering, and professional video recording. He had thought of everything. Jessica's lawsuit was still pending, though her attorney had been remarkably quiet after receiving our response, which included a detailed summary of Uncle Ben's will and the ironclad nature of my sole beneficiary status. I suspected they were realizing they had no case, but Jessica was too proud to back down. The day of the meeting arrived. I woke up at 5 a.m., too nervous to sleep. I put on the best suit I owned, a charcoal gray one I'd bought for job interviews 6 years ago, and drove to Seattle. I arrived at the hotel at noon, 2 hours before the scheduled 2 p.m. meeting. Mr. Whitmore was already there, along with 2 other attorneys from his firm and a professional videographer. Are you ready for this? Mr. Whitmore asked. I think so, I said. Is everything set up the way Uncle Ben specified? Exactly as he specified, Mr. Whitmore confirmed. The seating arrangement, the presentation materials, everything. Your great-uncle was extraordinarily detailed in his instructions. At 1:45 p.m., family members started arriving. I watched through a small window as they filed into the conference room, confused and curious about why they'd been summoned. Jessica arrived with her fiancé Brad and immediately started complaining loudly about how inconvenient this was and how she had better things to do than waste her Saturday. Caroline showed up in a designer suit, looking like she was about to conduct a business merger. Marcus arrived late as always, talking loudly on his phone about some deal he was closing. My parents sat together near the front, looking worried. My grandmother was there, sitting with Aunt Margaret and Cousin Daniel. The three of them were the only ones who looked calm. At exactly 2 p.m., Mr. Whitmore entered the conference room and I followed behind him. The buzz of conversation died down as people noticed us. Jessica's eyes locked onto me with unconcealed hostility. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Whitmore began, his voice professional and commanding. "I'm Donald Whitmore, executor of Harold Benjamin Ashford's estate. I've asked you all here today because there are important matters regarding the estate that need to be addressed, and several of you have made inquiries or demands regarding distribution of assets. It's time to set the record straight." He gestured to me. "Most of you know Nathan Pierce. What you may not know is the full extent of what Harold Ashford left to him, or why. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through some important information. I'd ask that you hold your questions and comments until the end. This meeting is being recorded for legal purposes." A projector screen lit up behind us. On it was a title slide, "The Estate of Harold Benjamin Ashford, A Lesson in Family Values." I could see confusion on people's faces. This wasn't what they'd expected. Mr. Whitmore clicked to the next slide. It showed a photo of Uncle Ben, along with his dates of birth and death. Harold Ashford passed away at the age of 91 on September 2, 2023. To most of you, he was a quiet, modest man who lived simply and kept to himself. What you didn't know was that Harold was an extraordinarily successful investor who built a fortune of $18.5 million over 40 years. The room erupted. Gasps, exclamations, people turning to each other in shock. I saw Jessica's face go pale, then red. 18.5 million, not the 50 or 100,000 they'd been imagining. "Please hold your comments," Mr. Whitmore said firmly, waiting for the noise to die down. Harold left his entire estate to Nathan Pierce, his great-nephew, but he didn't do this arbitrarily. He did it after years of careful observation and with very specific intentions. The next slide showed Uncle Ben's letter to me. Mr. Whitmore read it aloud, every word, while my family sat in stunned silence. When he reached the part about how Uncle Ben had watched me choose education over wealth, how he valued my humility and kindness, I saw my mother start crying quietly. Caroline's face was unreadable. "But Harold didn't just leave Nathan money," Mr. Whitmore continued. "He left him a responsibility and a test. For the past 90 days, Nathan has been bound by specific conditions in the will. He was not allowed to reveal the full extent of his inheritance. He was instructed to continue his normal life and observe how family members treated him when they believed he had received a modest inheritance." The next slide appeared, and several people gasped. It was titled "The Generosity Test" and outlined the basic rules. Harold set aside $2.7 million specifically for family members, Mr. Whitmore explained. But this money was conditional. Any family member who demanded, expected, or pressured Nathan for financial assistance during the 90-day period without knowing the full extent of his inheritance would be permanently disqualified from receiving any portion of this fund. Harold believed that genuine family love and support should not be dependent on wealth. I watched the realization dawn on faces throughout the room. Jessica had gone completely white. Uncle Richard's mouth was hanging open. Caroline looked like she'd been slapped. "Let's review what happened during the past 90 days, Mr. Whitmore said, clicking to the next slide. It was a detailed timeline, with names and dates and specific amounts requested or demanded. Ellen Pierce, Nathan's mother, requested $35,000 for kitchen renovations on October 21st, within 1 week of Nathan receiving the inheritance. Disqualified. My mother made a small sound of distress. Caroline Pierce, Nathan's sister, made multiple suggestions about investment opportunities that would generate referral fees for her. Beginning October 23rd. Disqualified. Caroline's face had turned to stone. Marcus Pierce, Nathan's brother, pushed investment schemes that would benefit his own portfolio on 7 separate occasions. Disqualified. Marcus was staring at his phone, refusing to look up. The list went on. Richard Pierce, Patricia Pierce, Linda Morrison, Frank Morrison, Brandon Pierce, Amy Chen, Tom Westbrook, Each name appeared on the screen with dates, amounts, and specific quotes from their requests. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Mr. Whitmore's voice. "Jessica Morrison," Mr. Whitmore said, and everyone turned to look at her. "Demanded $47,000 for wedding expenses on April 6th. Publicly humiliated Nathan at his grandmother's birthday party. Posted defamatory content on social media. Threatened legal action. Disqualified." Jessica was shaking with rage or embarrassment or both. Her fiancé Brad had his hand on her arm, probably trying to keep her from storming out. In total, 23 family members made financial requests or demands during the 90-day test period, Mr. Whitmore continued. 23 people failed to see Nathan as anything more than a potential source of money. Harold anticipated this with remarkable accuracy. He had documented years of similar behavior patterns in his personal journals. The next slide showed pages from Uncle Ben's journal, the entries I'd been reading for weeks. Comments about me being dismissed at family gatherings. Caroline's condescending remarks about my career. Jessica's disdain for my modest lifestyle. Marcus's constant positioning of himself as superior. It was all there, dated and documented, undeniable evidence of years of disrespect. However, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice softening slightly, not everyone failed the test. 3 family members demonstrated genuine care and respect for Nathan without any expectation of financial gain. The next slide showed 3 photos. My grandmother, cousin Daniel, and Aunt Margaret. Ruth Pierce actively defended Nathan and showed unconditional support. Daniel Morrison called to offer emotional support with no financial agenda. Margaret Thompson sent encouragement and expressed pride in Nathan's character. These 3 individuals passed the test. Mr. Whitmore clicked to the next slide. As a result, the $2.7 million family fund has been distributed as follows. Ruth Pierce receives $900,000. Daniel Morrison receives $900,000. Margaret Thompson receives $900,000. The room exploded. People were shouting, standing up, gesturing wildly. Jessica was on her feet, screaming something I couldn't quite hear over the chaos. Uncle Richard was yelling about the unfairness of it all. Caroline was arguing with Mr. Whitmore about the legal validity of the test. Mr. Whitmore raised his hand and his voice. "Please sit down. We're not finished." It took several minutes for order to be restored. Some people sat back down reluctantly. Others remained standing, arms crossed, faces furious. "The will is legally binding and has been reviewed by multiple attorneys," Mr. Whitmore said firmly. "There is no legal basis for challenging it. Harold was of completely sound mind when he created these terms, and he had every right to distribute his assets as he saw fit. If anyone wishes to pursue legal action, they are welcome to try, but I can assure you that you will lose and likely incur significant legal fees in the process." Jessica sat down heavily, her face buried in her hands. "There's one more element to Harold's plan," Mr. Whitmore continued. "Nathan, would you like to explain?" This was my moment. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "Uncle Ben left me a responsibility along with this inheritance," I said. "He wanted me to use the money wisely, to help people genuinely, and to never forget where I came from. Over the past 90 days, I've learned a lot about who values me as a person versus who valued what they thought I could do for them financially." I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as I could. "I want you to understand something. When Jessica screamed at me at Grandma's party, calling me pathetic and worthless and demanding I pay for her wedding, I was already worth $18.5 million. When you, Mom, asked me to pay for your kitchen renovation 2 days after I inherited, I was already set for life. When you, Caroline, implied I was too stupid to manage my own finances, I already had professional advisors handling a multi-million-dollar estate. When you, Marcus, tried to sell me on your investment schemes, I already owned 14 rental properties generating $43,000 a month in passive income. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single request, every demand, every condescending comment, I documented it all, just like Uncle Ben documented years of similar behavior before me. And you know what I realized? He was right. The people who treated me with kindness and respect when they thought I was just a struggling teacher making $52,000 a year are the only people who deserve to benefit from this inheritance. I pulled out Uncle Ben's letter and held it up. He wrote me a letter. In it, he said, "Don't let them change you. The people who didn't value you when you were a teacher making $52,000 a year don't suddenly deserve your generosity now that you have money." And he knew. He knew exactly what would happen, and he was right. Jessica stood up, her face twisted with anger and tears. This is cruel, Nathan. This whole thing is cruel. We're your family. You're right, Jessica, I said, looking directly at her. We are family, and that's exactly why this hurts so much. Because family should have supported me when I had nothing. Family should have respected my career choice instead of making me feel like a failure at every holiday dinner. Family should have called to check on me instead of calling to ask for money. We didn't know, she shouted. How were we supposed to know you were secretly rich? That's exactly the point, I said quietly. You should have been kind to me when you thought I had nothing. That's what real family does. Uncle Ben set aside almost $3 million for family members who passed that test. He was willing to be incredibly generous to people who demonstrated genuine character. You just weren't one of them. So what now? Caroline asked, her voice cold. You're just going to cut us all off? Never speak to us again? That's your big plan? No, I said. I'm not cutting anyone off. You're my family and I still love you, despite everything. But I'm also setting boundaries. I won't be funding lifestyle choices or bailing people out of financial situations they created. I won't be the family ATM machine. What I will do is this. I nodded at Mr. Whitmore, who clicked to the next slide. It was titled, The Ashford Educational Legacy Fund. Uncle Ben was passionate about education, I continued. He established 17 scholarships during his lifetime, all anonymously. I'm continuing that work. I've established a $5 million educational fund that will provide scholarships to students from low-income families who want to become teachers. Every year, we'll fund 20 full-ride scholarships to state universities covering tuition, books, housing, everything. I saw my grandmother smiling through her tears. This was the right thing, and she knew it. Additionally, I continued, I'm donating $2 million to Roosevelt High School where I teach to establish a state-of-the-art history and social studies program, including a new library, updated technology, and funding for field trips for students who couldn't otherwise afford them. This money will impact hundreds of students over the coming years. And the rest? Uncle Richard asked, his voice bitter. What are you going to do with the rest? Buy yourself a mansion, expensive cars, become everything you look down on us for being? No, I said simply. I'm going to keep teaching. I'm going to keep living in my modest apartment. I'm going to live off the rental income from Uncle Ben's properties, which is more than enough for my needs. And I'm going to invest the rest wisely so it can continue making a difference for years to come. Uncle Ben lived on less than $40,000 a year despite being a multimillionaire. He showed me that wealth doesn't have to change who you are. I paused, looking around the room one more time. This was never about punishing anyone, I said. This was about revealing truth. Uncle Ben gave me an incredible gift. Not just money, but clarity about who the people in my life really are. Some of you failed the test, and that's painful for everyone. But it's also an opportunity. You can choose how you respond from here. You can be bitter and resentful, or you can take a hard look at your values and priorities. That choice is yours. Mr. Whitmore stood up again. This concludes the formal portion of this meeting. The terms of Harold Ashford's will have been executed exactly as he specified. The distributions to Ruth Pierce, Daniel Morrison, and Margaret Thompson will be completed within 30 days. If anyone has legal questions, they can contact my office. But I want to be absolutely clear. This will is unbreakable. Multiple attorneys have reviewed it. Any attempt to contest it will fail. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my grandmother stood up and walked over to me. She wrapped her arms around me and held me tight. Your Uncle Ben would be so proud of you, she whispered. I'm so proud of you. Daniel and Aunt Margaret came over next, both of them looking shocked, but touched by the news of their inheritance. I don't know what to say, Daniel said. I just called to check on you. I didn't expect. I know, I said. That's why you're getting it. You cared without expecting anything in return. That means everything. The rest of the family was filing out in various states of anger, shock, and shame. Jessica left without looking at me, Brad hurrying after her. Caroline paused at the door, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just shook her head and walked out. Marcus left without a word, still staring at his phone. My mother approached me crying. Nathan, I'm so sorry, she said. I didn't realize. I should have just been happy for you. I should have been supportive without asking for anything. I know, Mom, I said, and I forgive you, but things are going to be different from now on. I need you to respect my boundaries and my decisions. I will, she promised. I will, I swear. My father had stayed back waiting until most people had left. He approached me slowly, looking ashamed. Your mother and I talked about this on the way here, he said quietly. We thought maybe you'd inherited 50, maybe 100,000. We were already planning how to ask you for help with various things, the house, the cars, retirement expenses. We had a whole list. He shook his head. I'm ashamed of that, Nathan. You deserved parents who were just proud of you, not parents who saw you as a potential funding source. I'm sorry. This was the most honest thing my father had said to me in years. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. The room slowly emptied until it was just me, Mr. Whitmore, my grandmother, Daniel, and Aunt Margaret. What happens now? I asked Mr. Whitmore. Now you live your life, he said with a slight smile. The legal matters are settled. The distributions will be handled. Your inheritance is secure. You're free to move forward however you choose. I looked at my grandmother. Grandma, I want you to know that your $900,000 comes with no strings attached. You can do whatever you want with it. Travel, renovate your house, help your church, anything. It's yours. She patted my hand. I know exactly what I'm going to do with some of it, she said. I'm going to establish a fund for that educational scholarship program you mentioned. Another $1 million added to it. Ben would have loved that. I felt tears prick my eyes. Grandma, you don't have to. I want to, she said firmly. Your Uncle Ben and I were close when we were young, before life got complicated. He would have wanted this, and so do I. Over the following weeks, the aftermath of the Revelation meeting rippled through my family in unexpected ways. Some people doubled down on their resentment. Jessica blocked me on all social media and told mutual family members she never wanted to see me again. Fine by me. Her lawsuit was quietly dropped 3 days after the meeting. Caroline sent me a stiff, formal email saying she needed space to process and suggesting we not have contact for a while. I didn't fight it. Marcus never apologized, but he also stopped trying to pitch me investment schemes, which was its own kind of progress. But some people surprised me. My mother called me every week, not to ask for anything, but just to talk. She started asking about my students, about my lesson plans, actually listening to the answers. It was strange at first, but it felt genuine. My father drove to Portland to visit me, something he hadn't done in 3 years. We had dinner at a small Italian restaurant near my apartment, and he asked questions about my life, my teaching philosophy, my dreams for the future. Real questions, with real interest behind them. I wasted a lot of years being disappointed that you weren't more like Caroline or Marcus, he admitted over dessert. I missed seeing how special you actually are. I'm sorry for that, Nathan. I'm really sorry. I forgive you, Dad, I said. Just don't waste any more years. 3 months after the Revelation meeting, I was still teaching at Roosevelt High School. I still lived in my same modest apartment, though I had upgraded a few things like my mattress and bought a newer used car. The biggest change in my daily life was subtle. I had stopped feeling anxious about money. Bills didn't stress me out. Unexpected expenses didn't cause panic. It was a quiet kind of freedom that I was still getting used to. The $5 million educational fund was up and running. We had received 342 applications for the first year of scholarships and selected 20 exceptional students who wanted to become teachers. Each of them would receive a full ride to college, plus a $5,000 annual stipend for living expenses. I met with each scholarship recipient personally, and their gratitude and excitement reminded me why I had become a teacher in the first place. The donation to Roosevelt High School had transformed the history department. We now had 47 new computers, an expanded library with over 2,000 new books, and funding for field trips that had previously been impossible. My students were taking trips to historical sites, museums, even a week-long trip to Washington, D.C. for my AP History class. Watching their faces light up at the Lincoln Memorial made every difficult moment of the past few months worth it. I had also quietly started helping individual students in ways that didn't draw attention. A student whose family couldn't afford the $80 fee for the SAT test suddenly found it mysteriously paid for. A brilliant kid who needed a laptop for college applications received one from an anonymous donor. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just using my resources to remove barriers for kids who deserved better chances. Daniel and I had become genuinely close friends. We met for dinner every few weeks, and he never treated me differently because of the money. He had used his $900,000 to pay off his house, set up college funds for his 3 kids, and donate $100,000 to a children's hospital where he had once received treatment as a kid. He didn't need to do the last part, but he wanted to. It was exactly the kind of thing Uncle Ben would have done. Aunt Margaret had surprised everyone by using her $900,000 to take a year off from her job as a school librarian and travel the world, something she had always dreamed of doing, but never thought possible. She sent me postcards from Italy, Japan, New Zealand, and Peru, each one thanking me and Uncle Ben for giving her this opportunity. She was 67 years old and finally living her dreams. My grandmother added her $1 million to the educational fund, just as she'd promised, bringing the total to $6 million. Then she called a family meeting and announced she was changing her own will to include a similar test to Uncle Ben's. Anyone who had demanded money from me during those 90 days would receive a significantly reduced inheritance when she passed. Anyone who had shown genuine character would be rewarded accordingly. The announcement caused another family uproar, but she was unmoved. Ben was right, she told them flatly. Character matters more than blood relation. 6 months after inheriting, I received a letter from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Jessica. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and it arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday evening. Dear Nathan, it began. I've spent the past 6 months being angry, hurt, and convinced I was the victim in all of this. I hired 2 different lawyers to try to find a way to contest Uncle Ben's will. Both told me the same thing. It's airtight and I have no case. But more importantly, both of them asked me the same question. Did you ask for money? When I admitted I had demanded $47,000 for my wedding, one of the lawyers actually laughed at me. Not in a mean way, but in a, you really don't see it way. He asked me why I thought I deserved money from someone else's inheritance for my wedding. I didn't have a good answer. I've been in therapy since the Revelation meeting. My therapist has helped me understand that I've spent most of my life feeling entitled to things I didn't earn. My parents gave me everything I wanted growing up, and I never learned to appreciate what I had or work for what I wanted. When you inherited money, my first thought wasn't, I'm happy for Nathan. It was, what can I get out of this? That's ugly, Nathan. That's really ugly, and I'm ashamed of it. I'm not writing to ask for money or forgiveness or anything else. I'm writing to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for screaming at you at Grandma's party. I'm sorry for the social media posts. I'm sorry for the lawsuit threat. I'm sorry for years of treating you like you were less than because you chose a career that pays modestly. You were living your values, and I was too shallow to see that as admirable. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to understand why Uncle Ben set up that test, and I'm trying to learn from failing it so spectacularly. I hope you're doing well. I hope your students appreciate having such a dedicated teacher. And I hope someday, maybe years from now, we can have a relationship that's based on actual family love instead of whatever dysfunctional thing we had before. Sincerely, Jessica. I read the letter 3 times. It felt genuine. It felt like actual growth. I didn't respond immediately, but I did save the letter, and 2 weeks later I sent her a brief note saying I appreciated her honesty and wished her well on her journey. Small steps. As the 1-year anniversary of Uncle Ben's death approached, Mr. Whitmore called me to his office for a final meeting. There's one last element of your great-uncle's estate that I haven't yet revealed, he said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Harold left instructions that this was to be opened exactly 1 year after his death, and only after you had successfully completed the 90-day test and made your initial decisions about how to use the inheritance. He handed me the envelope. It was addressed to me in Uncle Ben's handwriting. I opened it carefully and pulled out a letter and a small key. Dear Nathan, the letter read. If you're reading this, it means a year has passed since my death, and you've successfully navigated the test I set up. I hope it wasn't too painful, though I suspect it was difficult at times. Watching people you love reveal their true priorities is never easy. I want you to know that I spent years wrestling with how to handle my estate. I could have split it evenly among all my relatives and let them fight over it after I was gone. I could have given it all to charity and left nothing to family. But I chose a third path, to give it to the one person I believed would use it with wisdom and integrity. Everything I've seen suggests I was right to trust you. The enclosed key is to a safe deposit box at Seattle First National Bank, box number 347. Inside you'll find one more gift, something personal that I want you to have. It's not valuable in a financial sense, but it meant everything to me, and I believe it will mean something to you too. Thank you for being exactly who you are, Nathan. Thank you for choosing meaning over money, for choosing education over prestige, for choosing integrity over image. The world needs more people like you. Use this inheritance wisely, use it generously, but most importantly, use it in ways that would make you proud, to look at yourself in the mirror every morning. That's the only measure of success that actually matters. I was never able to tell you this in person because I was too reserved, too private, too British in my emotional reticence. But I loved you, Nathan. I was proud of you. And I died knowing that my money would go to someone who truly deserved it. Live well, teach well, love well. That's all any of us can do. With deep affection and respect, Uncle Ben. I was crying by the time I finished reading. Mr. Whitmore politely looked away, giving me a moment to compose myself. Do you know what's in the safe deposit box? I asked. No, he said. Harold was very private about that. He handled that deposit himself, without any of my firm's involvement. Whatever it is, he wanted it to be a surprise. The next day, I went to Seattle First National Bank with the key and the authorization documents Mr. Whitmore had provided. The bank manager led me to the vault and left me alone in a small private room with box 347. Inside was a worn leather-bound journal, much older and more used than the one Uncle Ben had kept about family dynamics. This one was labeled, My Life's Joy, The Lessons I've Learned. I opened it and found page after page of Uncle Ben's reflections, written over decades, entries about books he'd loved, places he'd traveled, mistakes he'd made, wisdom he'd gained. It was essentially his life philosophy, documented in his own hand. But there was also something else in the box, a small velvet bag. Inside was a vintage pocket watch, clearly very old, engraved with the initials HBA and a date, June 15th, 1932, Uncle Ben's birth date. There was a note attached to the watch. This belonged to my father, who gave it to me on my 21st birthday. He told me it was a reminder that time is our most valuable resource, and we should spend it on things that matter. I'm giving it to you now with the same advice. Don't waste your time on people who don't value you. Don't waste your time chasing wealth for its own sake. Use your time to make a difference, to connect with people who matter, to create meaning. That's what I tried to do, and I hope you'll do the same. I held the watch carefully, feeling the weight of it, the history of it. 3 generations of the Ashford family, and now it was mine to carry forward. That evening I sat in my apartment and read through Uncle Ben's journal, cover to cover. It took me 5 hours, but I didn't want to stop. Every page was full of wisdom, humor, and deep reflection about what makes a life meaningful. He wrote about his regrets, never marrying, never having children of his own, being too private and distant from family. But he also wrote about his joys, watching his investments grow not for his own sake but so he could leave something meaningful behind, helping people anonymously, finding satisfaction in simple pleasures like a good book or a well-brewed cup of tea. Near the end of the journal there was an entry from just 3 months before he died. I spent my life accumulating wealth that I never needed, but I always knew it would have a purpose. Now in my final months I find peace knowing that Nathan will carry forward the values that matter: education, integrity, generosity, and kindness. My life wasn't perfect, but my death will serve a purpose. That's more than most people can say. I closed the journal and sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. I had started as Nathan Pierce, the disappointing middle child, the struggling teacher who never lived up to family expectations. I had inherited $18.5 million and exposed the truth about my family's values in the process. I had lost relationships that I thought I valued and discovered relationships that actually mattered. And through it all, I was still the same person, still teaching American history to 147 students at Roosevelt High School, still living modestly, still finding joy in helping others succeed. The money hadn't changed who I was. It had just revealed who everyone else was. 1 year after Uncle Ben's death, I organized a small memorial gathering at his grave. I invited my grandmother, Daniel, Aunt Margaret, and Mr. Whitmore. The 5 of us stood around his simple headstone, which read, Harold Benjamin Ashford, teacher of wisdom, lover of learning, builder of legacies. He would have hated a big production, my grandmother said with a soft laugh. He always preferred things quiet and meaningful. He got his wish, I said. His legacy is quiet but incredibly meaningful. 20 students are getting college educations because of him. Hundreds of kids at Roosevelt High have better resources because of him. And 4 people who might have been overlooked got life-changing opportunities because he valued character over entitlement. 5 people, Mr. Whitmore corrected gently. Don't forget yourself, Nathan. You got the biggest opportunity and the biggest responsibility. He was right. The money was the least important part of what Uncle Ben had given me. He had given me validation, clarity, and purpose. He had shown me that my choices to live with integrity and follow my passion weren't failures. They were exactly right. As we left the cemetery, my grandmother took my arm. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "You could do anything. Travel the world, retire early, buy a mansion. What comes next?" I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "Monday morning I have to teach the Constitutional Convention to my third period class. That's what comes next." She laughed and squeezed my arm. Ben chose exactly right. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that karma is real, please do me a favor. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have handled the revelation meeting differently? Or would you have followed Uncle Ben's plan exactly as he designed it? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who only valued you for what you could do for them? Share your experiences below. Thank you so much for watching. And remember this: real wealth isn't measured by the size of your bank account. It's measured by the integrity of your choices, the depth of your relationships, and the positive impact you have on the people around you. Money can reveal character, but it doesn't create it. That comes from within, from the values you choose to live by every single day, regardless of your financial situation. I'll see you in the next one.